Welcome to GRE Snacks, snackable episodes about the GRE exam and graduate school admissions. I'm Tyler, founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable GRE course that includes everything you need to ace your GRE exam. A full textbook, videos on key topics, tons of GRE questions backed by our memory enhancing algorithm, and built-in study planner and essay grader built right into the platform, and full-length practice exams. You can try it out for free by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, be sure to use the code podcast to get you 10% off. Now, let's get started. Today we've got Dr. Justin Grimes from Apply to Graduate School back with us, and really excited to have you back. Justin, I would love if you could just introduce yourself for the people who haven't heard you before.
Absolutely. Dr. Justin Grimes here from applytograduateschool.com. Our mission at Apply to Graduate School is to make graduate education more appealing, accessible, and equitable for all. Our call to action is to work with current college students and working professionals over 30 who have professional experience and are trying to navigate a career transition. And that could be career entry, career pivoting. They want to impact research in their knowledge in their field, become credible thought leaders, and explore options that meet their professional and personal goals. And so through that, we offer several services, including coaching, personal statement, editing services, workshops, and a lot more things. And our book, 20 Questions to Answer Before You Apply to Graduate School, which can be purchased from the website or online at Amazon. Pick your choice.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. And so today we're going to be talking about part-time versus full-time graduate school, which I'm excited about because it's something we haven't covered on this podcast before. First and foremost, especially with your intro, you're talking about working with people that are, already in the workforce, looking at kind of a career change. Obviously, if you're going for your master's in biology before you even get a job, you're probably going to full-time graduate school.
Oh,
But
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but the part-time versus full-time debate is really about the people that have been in the working world and are kind of looking, like you said, to level up their experience and um, potentially, even with a part-time degree, it can still really help you, advance in your career, either within a company or without. And so, what are for you, kind of, who are the people that are debating this, I guess, right? Or maybe the best way to start this is to kind of talk about what is each one of these two options good for? Like who is it for?
It's a really good question. So I can explain really the difference between part-time and full-time graduate enrollment and then really get into who is the target audience for these particular degrees.
Right.
So when a person is thinking about the difference between a part-time and full-time degree, the main difference is the number of credits they're going to take each semester.
Hmm.
And I'll talk a little bit more about what that credit looks like, but typically part-time graduate students usually take less than 9 credit hours. However, there
Hmm.
are some graduate students that will enroll in a thesis based or dissertation based graduate program that usually need more to meet the requirement in order to
Hmm.
be able to satisfy that graduate requirement. And so when you're talking about part-time enrollment, again, 9 or less hours, typically you're going to see people taking 8 hours or less. One of the key factors to consider for part-time is the number of hours you need to take in order to qualify for the FAFSA. And
Mm.
so you must have at least 6 credit hours in order to qualify for financial aid with FAFSA. So if you're filling out that application and you're looking to get a student loan, the most typical student loan that people take out is a graduate plus loan, you're going to need to take at least 6 hours. So that's an important factor to consider. When you're doing part time, you're also typically going to take a lot longer to complete your program. The
Hmm.
financial aid models tend to look a little bit different for part timers versus full timers, and we could talk a lot more about the benefits and the pros and cons, as I would say, about each. Full time, typically those students will pay a little bit more in tuition and fees, but they also don't have to take as many credit hours because their credit hours will go towards something else different. So, for example,
Mm.
if I'm a full time doctoral student, I may take 18 hours, but I may only pay for 12 because 6 of those may be for research or dissertation hours. So it's really combined into the total package or the total amount of hours that I'm taking. It may not be coursework specific. Now, other things to consider with full time that typically sometimes can get in the way for people is, are all full time students um, fully funded? And so that's a debate there that people tend to have. And the question is, it depends. I mean, the answer to that question is it depends. There are some individuals who happen to work for employers that would allow them to take a certain number of hours. So say that I am a full-time employee, I work 40 hours a week, but I also take full-time credit. So I'm taking about 9 or 10 hours, or 10 hours or a little bit more. So maybe 2 classes and some research hours because maybe I'm on a research team, and I'm able to do those classes during the day. I'm able to do those during the evening, but maybe my funding doesn't come directly from the graduate program. Maybe it comes from a state employee assistance program or my organization that I work for, or I'm just paying out of pocket, but I'm choosing to still do this. So that's a misconception that all full time students are also fully funded.
Mm,
And the other part of that is, do part time students receive funding? It really depends on the graduate program. There are some fellowships that are out there, but typically, when you're going to see fellowships, grants, and awards, they're often going to be going to, in the graduate, and you're talking about graduate education, they're specifically going to go to often full time students. So it really depends on what you're looking for in terms of how much you can take on. When people ask me
mhm,
the question of which option they should choose, one of the things I encourage people to really think about um, is three things. One, when do you want to take classes? That's number one. Can you afford to take classes during the day, or do you need the evening, or are you looking for
mm,
something that can be kind of really whenever, a little bit of a la carte, and probably online or a for-profit institution? So that's the first question you really want to answer and determine your enrollment type. Then the next thing is, how much can you afford? Like, how much time can you afford to give towards more education? How much can you financially afford? How much can you emotionally, physically afford? Can you actually show up into a
mhm.
place and be ready to do the work? And sometimes that might look like doing it online. It may look like at a traditional brick and mortar. And the last one is, when do you ideally want to complete your degree? Again, part timers take longer, right? Because you're not enrolled in the same number of hours. So, thus, it's going to take you longer to complete the degree. So, if you have a marker in mind, say you want to get a master's degree, and the advertisement is it takes on average 2 years. Well, the question you really want to ask yourself and ask of any person who works for this particular program or the institution is that average based on full time enrollment or part time enrollment? And if it happens to be part-time enrollment, great. If it happens to be
Mhm,
full-time enrollment and you can get done in a year, that's great too. Do you really want
mhm.
to think about that? And oftentimes people don't ask that question. They just see the average and get excited that I'm going to complete my master's degree in 2 years. And the group that they were targeting were not part-time students. They were definitely looking at full-time. So, you look at those
Right.
commercials and ads, look at the fine print.
Well, the other thing too, I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but I think like one of the key things is if you're going to do full-time graduate school, you basically can't have a full-time job. Like it just the hours overlap too much, and it's just too much time. Like you almost have to do part-time if you're going to keep your job while you're doing school.
Absolutely. I will say, for sanity, you definitely want to consider the difference between the two. And there are some graduate programs specifically that only enroll full time graduate students. And they
Mhm,
do that because they want to offer the funding, they want to engage in the research. It is more of a partnership between the student and the faculty. And so as a result, that type of work that you're going to be doing, the extension of work that you're going to do is going to require that of like you're working a full-time job. And so graduate school does become your full-time job. I was one of those students who left his full-time job to pursue graduate school full-time on a graduate school assistantship, or what they classified as a doctoral internship. And
mhm,
so I received tuition and tuition coverage. believe my fees, if they weren't greatly reduced to like $25 an hour or something like that, I still had financial means. Plus, I had a monthly stipend. So graduate school was my full time job, and that was kind of a little challenging to be in a graduate program
Hmm.
at the University of Georgia that accepted part time and full time students, and we both were taking classes together. Now, of course, the time of day it varied in terms of what the enrollment looked like, and it was a cohort model. No, it was a community based model, but it felt cohort like the first year because we all took the same things together. So
Hmm.
it's just different, right? But I encourage folks who are considering full time programs to think about the totality of the difference and the sacrifice you're going to make. And financially, that is one of them. There are
Hmm.
some, especially for international students. If you're doing a full time graduate program that's probably fully funded for you, they're not going to allow additional work outside of that graduate program. That might be a part of what's the requirement for your visa. That may be a requirement for the graduate program, or
Hmm.
something that's worked out with the international office. So you really want to know what exactly you're getting into, especially when it comes to employment. And then creative things that people do. Some people have side hustles and other things that they do when they're in there that are not necessarily full time employment, but they do engage in the gig economy in other ways to supplement additional needs.
Hmm. Right. Yeah, I mean it's challenging. I mean, of course, the fallback is always you take on a bunch of student loans, right?
Yeah, I don't. I try to and that's the premise of the work that I do and why I wrote the book is because I wanted people to make more informed decisions before they decide to embark on this. As I look at data around typical student loan debt, I can see who typically has the most, right? So those who go to
Hmm.
the for-profit institutions tend to have the highest, and those who identify as a racial minority tend to have the highest. And so,
Hmm.
I remind people, higher education is still a business. Like, while they are providing a great product to individuals, and how you use that product is up to your discretion, it is still a
Hmm.
business. And so, the customer is the student, and sometimes the employee or the customer is the faculty as well. So, you really want to make sure that you're maximizing and thinking through what exactly you want to do, and what the cost is going to be for you before you decide to take this on.
Right. Well, and I think, and obviously you can't perfectly predict it, but I think you want to have some idea of how this degree is going to increase your income, right? Because if you're just taking on a bunch of debt and it doesn't really get you anywhere in the short term, like maybe it's something that you want to do for yourself, and that's totally great. And maybe it's because you're trying to switch careers, also great, and that might be a long-term play. But for the most part, you're going to have added expenses when you do graduate school, and you're going to have added expenses when you get out of graduate school. Whether that's because you just paid for graduate school or because you got loans now that you got to pay off. So you want to have some kind of track towards that degree giving you more income.
Absolutely. And to even add to that, so sticking with the topic or the theme of part-time versus full-time, a lot of graduate programs offer additional professional development funds or resources, grants for current students, right? So, added expense typically for a lot of students who are at research based institutions is you're going to have to go to a conference. You're going to present at a national, international, or local conference. And oftentimes your graduate funding does not cover that. So that's going to be an additional cost. So where are you
Hmm.
getting that money from? Maybe you have access to some funds through maybe a graduate student association or through a department, so you're gonna want to figure that out, right? So that's another one of those things that if they have those awards, typically those types of financial awards for travel and conferences go to full-time students. So if you're a part-time student, right, and you're going to be using your own income or maybe something else, right? Maybe your employer is willing to, offer a little bit of additional assistance, but oftentimes you're going to be paying for that out of pocket. And some of the other things that people really need to consider full time versus part time. Full time individuals who do this and are fully funded are likely going to be going to an institution at another location. So you're going to have travel expenses in terms of uprooting your life to this new places. You may have to
Hmm.
consider turning on utilities and these things based on your housing and where you're going to live if you don't stay on campus, if they even offer it. Um, Again, I mentioned travel, basic living expenses. Maybe you have childcare expenses. Maybe you have dependents. So you're going to have to think about healthcare and mental health services. There's a lot more that you really want to read the details and have conversations with departments and do your research around what is available to graduate students. Like healthcare is a great one of those, whether you're part time or full time. Maybe you have something if you're part time through your job and your employer, but what if they offer another option as well that may be a little bit more cost effective for you, or maybe offer some additional things for your dependents if you have children or someone else that you're taking care of? These are the things you really want to look at that have an impact on your enrollment type.
Hmm. Yeah, that too, and also obviously we talked about this earlier with how much time you have, but like you got to be able to kind of work the schedule around it. You talked about kids, right? Like even if you're like in a partnership where you feel like your partner can share some of the burden around kids, you still have to deal with the logistics and the timing has to work out for that, right?
Absolutely. Timing is a big factor in this. I often tell people number one, do you have more capacity for more education? You want to
Hmm.
make sure that when you are deciding to pursue this degree, that this fits within your current lifestyle. It's going to meet the goals and needs that you have. And so that funnels into my number two point that I often share with people is think about the return on investment. So this is going to be a change and a shift in the ways in which you currently work and live. So I often tell people when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So, and when you say yes to graduate school, you're typically going to be saying no to things. So I love to talk about my working professionals and parents. Like if you're engaged in an organization and you do a lot of service volunteer work or you're a parent, there's going to probably be some events that you're not going to go to because you're going to want to dedicate the time to get your work done. When you start getting into the thickness of research, you're consumed mentally in a different headspace. And so, what does that look like? What things need to shift? What things need to alter? How do schedules need to change in order for you to be able to be a thriving graduate student, but also be a very present person in your life? And so, sometimes people don't consider that shift and change. And sometimes individuals around you aren't prepared for that change for you. They're used to your availability, they're used to
Mm,
you showing up. You're used to being able to stay at work till 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, an extra hour later. But now that time needs to go to you getting ready to transition and leave at 4 so that you can make it to the building or join your online class. And now that's going to look different. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about these contingencies, these shifts, these changes that you're going to have to make. And I don't like to call them sacrifices. I think they're all shifts. And you'll shift back again once you complete it, right? You have a new ways of approaching work and doing things. But I think the return on investment for that should be weighed very early on. And even the
mhm,
financial piece of it. Super important to think about not only what is this investment I'm making going to do for me, but also, especially if you're part time and you have an employer paying for it, what does this do for the employer? It's not
mhm.
random that they decide to offer any type of financial assistance to employees. There's a return that they're looking for on this. And I want you to make
Right.
sure that you're feeling like you're getting the most out of it as well.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I really like that line that you said that if you're saying yes to something, you're saying no to something else, right? I think that a lot of people, especially kind of like pe people pleaser type personalities like myself, we want to say yes because we're being asked to do something, right? Whether that's, oh, can you like watch your cousin today or your nephew or whatever, or oh, can you, like, hey, like, I was just gonna come over and hang out and like shoot the shit because we haven't caught up in a while, and you're like, well, I can't, right? I gotta do this work. And I can totally see situations where people, would be surprised when like their loved ones or their friends blame them for not being available the way that they used to be, which is, not really fair, but I'm sure that's happened.
Oh, quite a bit. It happens a lot in graduate school,
Hmm.
because people are expecting you to be the version that they know you to be, and to show up in the ways that you have previously. and they
Hmm.
have not considered and factored that this new thing that you're taking on, this new identity and role of a graduate student, is something that may be foreign to them, especially if you're the first in your family. If you're a first gen graduate student, there are a lot of things that are going to change within your relationships with your family and
Hmm.
your friends as a result of pursuing this. And so I think it's important to have open and honest conversation about your process of applying as well as when you start, right? Because too often people are celebrating when they find out they got the letter, they got the admissions email, but they don't talk about or show the process to others. So, in essence, you want to
Hmm.
prep people to work with the version of you that's now going to be doing these things. And you want to create some balance for yourself. Like, school is important. You may be paying out of pocket, but you're still a human being who needs social interaction and engagement. You need a life outside of graduate school. And I know that that can be really challenging for a number of full-time students because they feel like they're on the clock. They're working with limited resources in terms of how much income they have often, and they're rushing to get to the end so that they can then go do whatever else there is, right? So some part-timers don't have that same concern about the financial aspect, about the security of health insurance and other things, benefits, right? That a lot of full-timers don't get. And so that creates a lot of pressure. And that pressure often comes in the form of a response or a reaction that people may or may not like. And regardless of that, you know, I think it's always important to be honest with yourself. And that goes back to my point of, do you have more capacity to manage this? And are you willing to make the shifts necessary to be successful? I don't think it's worth it. I just think it takes a little bit of time to figure that out and constantly being in communication with people around where you are. You know,
Hmm.
sometimes people want to help, but they don't know how to help because they have never been through this. Even if they
Right.
have, their graduate school experience is not your graduate school experience. That's a super important piece of advice I often tell people, that even if you're not the first in your family, that you may come from a family full of PhDs, but only you are attached to that ID number, and only you are enrolling in those classes. They can inform and provide some level of knowledge, maybe around methodology, theoretical frameworks, but at the end of the day, you're the one who has to complete the degree.
Yep. So then I want to get into more of the part-time versus full-time decision. I feel like we've
Mm,
talked about a lot of the sort of like peripheral things to consider, but we haven't really like gotten to like brass tacks a little bit, and I'd love to do that. So when you're
yeah.
talking to people and they like, do you feel like most people are coming to you with one of the two in mind, and then you're kind of talking them through the ramifications of that, or are people coming to you like, I don't know which one is best. What should I do?
Yeah, so it really depends on the audience. I think a lot of my current college students are only thinking about going to do this full time. They are not strongly considering, like, maybe I could work part time and do this. Like, some of them are not even considering accelerated programs. Like, you're already in undergrad and you could do some more of this. So that's, do some more school for there. So my full time working professionals, they tend to decide between the two. Right? It's not always one or the other for them. And I've had a number of working professionals who start as part timers, who towards the third year or fourth year of their doctoral degree decide to leave it and go full time in order to finish this dissertation out. And I've seen a couple of students do that with master's programs in order to do that because they had the financial resources to be able to do so. And so I think it's really complicated. So in my conversations, I ask people, what is your end goal? What do you want to achieve? What do you hope this degree is going to help you to achieve? How much time do you have allotted to be able to do this? And when do you want to finish?
Hmm.
And the thing, particularly at the doctoral level, I remind people, especially if you're going full time, you don't have control over that final day, right? There's a
Hmm.
committee, there's faculty who make decisions. And I'm speaking specifically for those who are going to probably the PhD programs, but when you start talking about EDDs, JDs, those tend to have more concrete deadlines around milestones and things you should achieve. But the EDD is typically for working professionals, so they tend to market those programs into knowing that that's the primary focus of their work is to be employees first. and then graduate students second. And so when I'm talking to working professionals, I'm really asking them about, hey, what does work look like for you? And do you have space in your day to be able to do this?
Hmm.
Because I don't want a person to say, you know what, I'm ready to take a full time load. And then next thing you know, they're in 3 credit hours and they're feeling stressed, they're overwhelmed, they're not performing well at work, not doing well at home. And it's causing all types of issues within their life. And so maybe
Right.
it looks like starting part time and switching over. Or maybe it looks like, you know what, I don't need a financial aid, but I'm willing to take a one credit class because my job will pay for it. That might be a great place. So we try to really look at the whole person and who's showing up before we start really saying, here's what our recommendation is. Because ultimately you gotta
Hmm.
do it. I'm done with mine, but it's time for you to figure out what you want to do.
Yeah. And then for people that are kind of making this decision, it sounds like, the key levers are, how much time do you have? What responsibilities or expectations do you have? Expectations other people have of you? What are your goals? What are you trying to get to? And then I guess just like the last one would be like, what programs are available, right?
Hmm.
I'm
And
curious
there's a few more
if
that I can
there's,
add to it as
yeah, I
well.
was gonna say, I feel like there's got to be someone missing.
Yeah. So other factors to consider. Number one is look at what the state and the institution you're applying to consider to be part time versus full time enrollment. It is not universal. What works in Utah may not work in Minnesota. It may not work in Alabama. It may not work in California. It may not work in Canada. So you really want to be very clear in terms of what does the state, the country, and the institution consider part time versus full time enrollment. And so write that down, have conversations if you're not sure around that. And what happens if you decide you want to shift or change? Ask people on the front end before you decide to apply. Another factor is important to consider is look at the difference in the cost of tuitions per credit hour, right? Are
Hmm.
you paying more as a full timer or less as a part timer? Typically, you're gonna see a lot of part timers pay a little bit less in tuition because the number of credit hours they're taking is a lot less. But you want to be clear on that. You also want to look at the
But
financial
also, I
aid.
could I could see a situation where your cost per hour is higher part time.
Yes, it can
Yeah.
be. Yes, it absolutely can be. Because again, I gave that example earlier where, for some full timers, they may reach a cap, right? So they're capped at 12 hours in terms of what they're required to pay in tuition and fees. Whereas, you know what? Hey, if you're part time and you're taking 9, you're paying that full 9 all the way. Doesn't
Right.
matter if there is no cap. Um, and so another thing to really consider is again the financial aid and the fellowship requirements based on enrollment. So
Hmm.
you may see that there's a fellowship you're interested in, or they may have an award that you've seen available or scholarship on the graduate school website. But what's the enrollment requirement for that? And so if it's for you must be full time enrolled. That's 12 hours or more. So there's no non negotiable around that.
Hmm.
You want to be clear around that. And the last thing is, particularly if you work for a state agency or you work for a place that offers some type of employee assistance or tuition waivers, look at the requirements for the state. So I like to use the example of North Carolina tuition program. Like they in North Carolina, they have some very specific rules around how many hours you can take, what they're going to pay for. It was very interesting. I think it was from them. It is you got tuition up to I believe it's 3 courses per academic year, and look at how they define courses. Right. So is it just fall, spring, or is it fall, spring, and summer? And so we haven't even got into that piece of it either. But summer tuition, summer fees, summer requirements are different. So you're not enrolling full-time load in the summer is not 9, 12 hours. It's like 6 versus part-time in the summer is 3. So it changes. But what does the aid package, what does enrollment look like for the summer? You want to know the difference between the fall and the spring and the summer.
Right. Yeah, and I think also the other two things that I think about are number one is, essentially, is this a school that makes the part-time experience good? And what I mean by that is like, is the part-time experience kind of an afterthought? Is it just something that they offer for people that like, want to come but can't do full time and they're like, okay, sure. Or are they making like a really good high quality part-time experience, right? Like I had a colleague do the UPenn Wharton, executive MBA in San Francisco, and that was like built to be a part-time program, and it like was
Mhm.
very valuable for them. And then on the other hand, there's sort of I guess the other part of it, which we haven't really talked about yet, is just like how reputable is a part-time degree versus a full-time degree. I think that a lot of times on resumes, and maybe it's just because of who I'm looking at, right? Like I'm not looking at a ton of people that have gone to graduate school yet in resumes, but I feel like they don't tell you maybe whether it's part time or full time super obviously, right? So it's almost like you can get kind of like credit for getting a full time master's doing part time a little bit. Is that correct, or is that just me making assumptions?
Yeah, brand name matters. And so when you're looking at that CV or that resume, no one is adding an extension on the bottom of that says part time enrolled or full time enrolled. At the end of the comma, it's just going to say MBA, MED, PhD, ED, like all those things. That is what it's going to show. So your enrollment type really won't matter at all when people are looking at degrees. Now, what people are going to be more concerned about is where did you get the degree at and what type of degree did you get, right? Like some people may say, did you get a traditional MBA from Cornell or did you do an executive program at Purdue, right? So,
Mhm.
you get to choose. I mean, whatever is listed on the degree, you want that to be factually what you share. But
For
is a
sure.
person
Yeah.
going to say, you know what, you did that executive MBA program in a year and a half, and we're really looking for candidates who had a complete immersion experience where they went to several continents. It just really depends on the job. And so, I think that's another part of this conversation is looking at your field and industry to see what they value in terms of the type of degrees. And if that type of degree happens to be available part time or full time, then great for you because you get the option. But if they are looking for some specific that you know for a fact that only those who have this particular degree tend to go do it full time, then you know what option you have to go to get that, right? Like a veterinary degree is a great example of that. Like you're going to get
Right.
a vet PhD, you're probably not doing that part time. You're fully in it in order to be able to do that.
Yeah, and also you mentioned vets, but I would also say that if you're trying to switch into an academic field, like biology, whatever else, like chemistry, like if you're like, I want to go basically back into being an academic and then try to get my PhD potentially after that. Those are probably always going to be full time, is my guess, or at least it's preferable because they don't just want you to be there as like a graduate student. It's also kind of a job, a little bit, like when you go to those kind of graduate programs.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of times people are looking for in academia, they're looking for individuals who have went to degree. Let me say it differently. They're looking for individuals with the degrees from accredited bodies, from certain certifications are present, certain knowledge is there, and typically we're going to see that in a PhD program. Um, but again, it really depends on the field. I'm thinking about the field that my wife works in. Like we met when we were doing our doctoral degrees, and so in her program they had full time and part time students, but primarily with the degree field they're going to enter counseling. Those individuals could go to industry or they can go into academia with this
Hmm.
degree. No matter what, they still had a PhD, but the way that they teetered off into what specific area they chose after that varied. And it really didn't matter their enrollment type. What mattered is them completing the degree. What mattered is them the licenses they needed to get and that they were part of an accredited body. I think it was KCREP accredited. And so that accreditation in her field, that's what matters the most, not the type of enrollment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you have any other kind of, as we wrap up here, any closing thoughts or other things that we haven't covered yet you want to make sure we cover?
Yeah, I can give again for anyone listening kind of the pros and cons for each. And so I'll
Oh, yeah.
start with part time. For part time, the pros for me is you tend to have um, faster work content implementation. So the things you are studying, you're able to implement in your current work now. You're able to
Mm,
connect, more realistically how this will manifest in the work that I do, how we can address this in real time. Sometimes your ongoing costs can be a little bit lower, but you're earning while you're learning, which is great, right? So you're not
right,
typically losing money because you're working. The cons, on the other hand, is longer completion time, so it's going to take you a little longer. There may be less networking opportunities because a lot of those happen in spaces where individuals who have a little more flexibility in their schedule, that you probably won't. And there's less connection with faculty. It can feel much like I show up, you give me this, I receive this, I give this back. So that's kind of the pros and cons for part time. Full time, the pros are shorter program length in the sense that you are able to take more classes, so you're going to get done at a faster pace. You also have access to a larger network because you're working directly with faculty, you're doing a lot more research, and you're getting your name out there in your field, in your industry. You become really fully immersed in all aspects of your field, which makes you a stronger scholar, typically a stronger employee when you finish. And you just become more well rounded in terms of what companies, organizations, or institutions, if you're going to academia, are looking for. The cons, because you're fully immersed and you're doing that work, there's potential burnout. Right? You may reach a point where you're feeling a bit overwhelmed by the amount of work that you're doing, and so there may be
mm,
burnout. There may be some questioning there, and so that shift of like, I wish I could go do something else or quit this program. There may be the buyer's remorse or the ability to kind of pivot out of it might not happen as fast. And so that's something there. Higher costs sometimes because of the additional things that you have to pay for that you don't have necessarily the resources or the reliance of a full time paycheck to provide you with. Career
right.
interruption. That could be a great, I mean, that could be a con for people where you're choosing to stop one career to enter into this world of being a full time student. And so that career interruption can be very difficult for some people, especially as they try
Yeah.
to shift identities. And the last piece is delayed earning potential. So the amount of money you're going to earn, it's going to be on the latter side of it. It's not going to be typically
Hmm.
during. So that's another con for full time.
Right. Well, and I mean, that was the biggest thing when I was thinking about going to full-time graduate school, which was like 5-ish years ago or something like that. The biggest problem that I had with it was, I wanted to earn more. I didn't have a ton of money in the bank, and I could get loans for the school part, but like, what about housing? What about meals? What about there's all kinds of other stuff that you got to pay for in the meantime, right? Like, do you want Netflix, right? there's there's books, right? Like there's all this stuff that like it comes on top of it, and in the meantime, you're not making any money. And then of course, your schoolmates are going to be like, "Let's all go on a trip," and you're like, "Okay, right?" Like it's a really I think it's going to be really dependent on the situation for a lot of people. I do think that you can get loans that cover like some of your living expenses too, but yeah, then you pay that back. So
Yeah, I mean, it is that. It is a loan, right? With a specific purpose. And what you do with that income, they typically expect it to be for educational usage only. But the reality is that part of your educational usage is your ability to live. And so we know that some of the loans that people take out is for cost of living and all things related to that.
yeah, exactly. Anything else you want to cover before we wrap up here?
I would just say tell people, really spend time researching on the graduate school websites or programs you're interested in. Really strongly consider the institutional type that you're attaching yourself to and deciding for yourself, what are my goals? What are my needs? What can I bring into my current lifestyle that will allow it to work? Or what am I willing to change in my current lifestyle in order to pick a program that's going to be best for me? And the last piece of that is really strongly consider the return on investment from the financial end. If you're in one field or industry, how does getting this graduate degree going to help you? And sometimes you may be only thinking about the career bump, but what are there additional skills? What are there additional things that you learn? Facilitation, research, curriculum development that are also
Networking?
additional skills. Networking. These things can provide great returns on investments that may not be financially immediate after you finish the degree, but long term, they're going to position you to get more money, more income, greater access and opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been GRE Snacks, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Dr. Justin Grimes from Apply to Graduate School. And Achievable has a great online GRE course that you can try for free by going to achievable.me and use the code podcast to get 10% off at checkout.